All right, it's like 6 o'clock on the dot. Thank you for everyone coming here today. Quite a few, like, big group. It's really interesting. So I'm just going to start the ball here and welcome Adam. Just for those who are coming in, I am Michaela Bridgmahan, and I am welcoming you all today as we are uninvited and also occupying on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Silks Okanagan people. As a curatorial and programming assistant here at the Kelowna Art Gallery, and on behalf of the board of directors and staff, we like to respectfully acknowledge that we are operating, gathering, and benefiting every day on these lands. So tonight we have pop art lecture series organized in conjunction with the current exhibition, which is From Warhol to Banksy, that is currently displayed in our exhibiting TV gallery up until October 16th. And so, we always welcome everyone to come in, where you can see over 120 works by pop art's most notable artists from all the collections, locally avid collector and lawyer Paul Mitchell and his wife Tracy Mitchell, who've lent us the works. And we're also like to take a moment to acknowledge and to support these businesses for the presentation of the From Warhol to Banksy. Also, like a shout out, thank you to RBC PH&N Investment Council and Pusher Mitchell LLP and RBC Private Banking. So today we are pleased to introduce Adam as he's going to take us through an exciting lecture about the history of Canadian graffiti, which I think you're originally from Alberta. Is that correct, Adam? Yep, right on, me too, Tree 7 land. Adam is the author of Visual Orgasm, The Early Years of Canadian Graffiti, a book that takes a fascinating look at the often unrepresented, unappreciated world of graffiti, street art, and street culture. With over 25 years of documenting graffiti across North America, Adam will share his insight into graffiti and spray paint art. He will also be focusing on the history, the growth, and where it is now. So just a thank you for joining us, Adam, here today. Before I hand it over, I just want to remind those that we did set aside a Q&A, 15 minutes, but also Adam just mentioned to me that he's open to questions during the presentation, like anything that sparks your mind. So I welcome you all to go to the chat, and it automatically sends it to us, Adam and I, and during the presentation, if there's a question, I'll just interrupt Adam a little bit and propose the question to him. So feel free, if not, like, percolate, like, steep into this conversation that he's sharing with us. It's knowledge is gift, and write down some notes, or and share it at the end. So so thank you all for coming. It's now 6:04, so I'm just gonna hand it over to Adam now. And thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much. I'm going to try and share my screen. I haven't done a Zoom call in quite a while. So hopefully things come together. So I'm not too sure if there's a lag on the call, but I have picked a number of photos, and a lot of it doesn't necessarily revolve around the history of Canadian graffiti, but certainly a lot around graffiti overall. So this is just a intro picture, but this is of my dad walking some train tracks in Calgary about 8 or 9 years ago, and so thought I'd use it as my main screen. As was mentioned, I published a book. I'm starting to forget when exactly that was published, but it's been at least 8 or 9 years ago, a book on the history of Canadian graffiti. So I got into graffiti about 1996. Did graffiti over the years. I never got very good at it. I was a young guy that was into hip hop and all the stuff that came with it. And I traveled a lot with my parents. And so over that time, I decided that I was too chubby to break dance, too white to rap, and too cheap to DJ. So I ended up in the graffiti realm, which has been really enjoyable since then. So got into graffiti '96, started documenting soon thereafter, traveling with my folks. And then in 1998, I started a website also called Visual Orgasm. And so my parents always cringe about it, but when you're 17, 18 years old, what better name to come up with? And it's stuck ever since. So that's kind of where that has come from. The website, ironically, or surprisingly, I guess, is more, I still operate to this day. So probably one of the longest or longer running websites documenting graffiti that's lasted this long. It certainly isn't as active as it used to be, especially with social media, has certainly impacted. But this book was an important piece of the puzzle in terms of really wanting to show the evolution of graffiti and how graffiti started in the 70s, primarily in places like Philadelphia and New York, and where it was interesting how it developed over time and how media such as movies like Style Wars and other things kind of appeared on TV, that those were ways that people, I guess, noticed it significantly, where they wanted to take part in it and get active in it. And so it's amazing to see how it's grown from the 70s and 80s to now, was it 2020s, around where graffiti is at. And so throughout the conversation today, just a variety of pictures that I've taken primarily in the last year that kind of are interesting pieces to look at, but also conversational topics as well. See if my pointer works. There. Oh, too fast. Yeah, so this is another picture involving me, which is not as exciting. It's been an interesting journey to see the development of graffiti over the last 30 years. And so this is a picture of a festival that the Bump Beltline Urban Mural Festival that takes place in Calgary. And so this is a picture from that event last year. And so interesting, just to, over the slides, I'll show you kind of some activities and things like that take place. And so not only do I operate a website, but I also distribute spray paint. So been actively distributing spray paints for the last 9 years or so. And so right now that's been a big piece of my work and involvement in the culture, not only documenting, but also providing spray paint across, at this point, North America, which is always a shock when I say it and think about it. This is the same piece that was in the previous picture. This one, it says AFEX, A-F-E-X. If you're able to try to decipher that, is always an interesting challenge for people. And so, certainly as you spend time looking at graffiti, it's always fun to challenge yourself and seeing the, especially the different styles that have developed, and you'll kind of see that throughout the pictures that I share. So graffiti, essentially really started around the idea of coming up with a name, a pseudonym that you would go by in the community. And so, early on, a lot of it related to places in New York related to your name plus your street. And people started with this idea of tagging. So it's really, really essentially doing your signature and doing it as elaborate and unique as possible to stand out. And the whole concept around graffiti is really developing notoriety within the culture and outside the culture. And so these two tags, the first one at the top says crumbs, CRUMS, and below that says fear, PHERE. So the P is quite loopy. Well, the whole tag is loopy. And then there's an H, E, and then R, and then the big E to finish it off. And so tagging is kind of like the staple part of graffiti that people usually start out, come up with names, and then sometimes those names stick, sometimes those names change, and really that's kind of the essence, is that you come up with a name, and then from the name you build out from there. So you start with tagging, and then from tagging you go to something like bubble letters, developing kind of, I guess, building on your skill level. So this would be doing bubble letters. So on the right side here, fear, gentleman's tag on the last page, fear. This is what we call these throw ups in graffiti culture, is what this looks like, or this is what his throw up looks like. And so it is kind of building off of that name and figuring out different ways to get noticed, depending on the area that you're graffiti in. It depends on how much time you have. So, a lot of people think of graffiti or like tagging and these types of quick throw ups and fill-ins as, more on the vandalism side of things. And that, obviously, there's lots that you can go into in terms of the concept of vandalism and people's property and ownership. And, graffiti certainly throws that idea of ownership significantly out the window. And so it does challenge that normality that we've created in our culture around ownership and allowance to do things. Obviously, it still can be challenging in terms of, it's against the law. And so, a lot of people risk quite a bit to take part in graffiti. And so, as people might wonder, why do people get into it? And there's a variety of reasons of why people get into it, but, it is being a part of something, that the notoriety piece and fame piece in North American culture, pretty much across the world, in terms of wanting to be somebody and be a part of something. And so graffiti is no different than anything else. It's really, you get to know your name, that people know me by, what I go by in graffiti. And so, my notoriety is there, but then I also have regular 9-to-5 government name that people also know me by and what I do in that realm. And so, some people probably like that idea of being able to play in both worlds. But certainly, people are attracted to the rush of being able to do graffiti and build up their notoriety, and certainly the skill level. Like, I was never skilled or got very skilled in graffiti, and that's why I never really stuck with it, because it's not as easy as it looks, that's for sure. That it certainly takes practice, it takes dedication, and that it's, even the idea of not having drips when you use spray paint, if you ever played with it before, is not a simple concept. So this is, ironically, I didn't plan this out, where I was focused on this one particular artist's work. So this is an interesting picture actually from last weekend in Calgary. So the fear, whose tag we saw, whose fill-in we saw, this is, early on in in a piece that he was creating. And so in graffiti, we talk about pieces is short for masterpiece. And so it's old terminology back from the New York days in terms of just explaining, what different kind of levels or types of graffiti are being created. And so this would be an example of a piece being started. And so I wanted to share this picture because I think it's interesting to see the development and the different factors that play into it. So you can kind of see in this picture that he has these wild kind of laser beams that he's built into the piece. And you'll see that the gray in between the kind of pinkish, we call it like outlines of the different shapes that make up the letters. You'll see that there's lots of gray in that. And so that would be kind of where he was kind of sketching or drawing out and developing the kind of initial layer of his piece to kind of outline of where he's going to cover and what those letters and things are going to look like. So it's fun to see, this picture of early on. This was, I think, day one. He was at it for a few days. And then this is piece. And so this is, I thought it'd be fun to show kind of the evolution and development of a piece such as his. And so you can see, how he ended up putting up a border kind of around the blue space and putting in a whole variety of colors into and shading them in together to create the fill of the letters. And it takes a lot of planning and understanding. And I know when I've played around with spray paint, I usually pick the brightest colors and start messing around, and then they never look as nice and as seamless as something like this. That obviously there's lots of thought that goes into shading, creating some depth, working with this kind of, we call it the kind of 3D piece, 3D part of the piece. So making it kind of multi-dimensional in terms of showing that the piece is kind of popping off of the wall. And really, I like to say how colors like this make a graffiti piece like this just pop altogether. That if you're driving down the street or walking by it, it's certainly going to catch your eye. And so it's amazing to see how over time this kind of development can happen, and that someone start early on, and as they build up their skills, like in any hobby or activity, their skills change, develop, and adapt. And it's amazing to see how that's happened. And you can see that even in the historical piece around graffiti in the early 80s, where it was very simple, very one-dimensional, straightforward colors, to where now, wherever you go across the world, graffiti is, there's so many different types depending on where you end up, to elaborate realism pieces, to elaborate three-dimensional pieces. And so, it's amazing to see how it's grown. And I think even the idea of the gallery having an exhibition around street art and things like that is something that probably wouldn't have happened 5-10 years ago. And so it's interesting to see the partly acceptance of some of it. Certainly there's a lot of it's still seen as grimy work, that's for sure, and not accepted by everyone, but it's certainly a lot more accepted than it was probably 15-20 years ago. This is just another kind of fun piece to share around. This one is also in Calgary. And yeah, this would be, or the previous one was a legal piece, so that was allowed by the property owner. This one would be more of an illegal piece, but obviously something that takes a number of hours to complete, and especially since it's illegal, that you it would have been done, most likely at nighttime, not the best lighting. And so it's amazing to see how people can, plan out such pieces. So in graffiti, a lot of times people do drawings or sketches, as they call them, where they kind of plan out what their pieces will look like and kind of develop different styles of their letters and how the letters look. So this one says Molex, so there's M and then an O with a kind of wisp, and then a L, and then a funky E with a long bottom, and then a K that is connected to the E. And so, it is interesting to see the different kind of themes that people create and come up with. I was just in St. Louis a few weeks ago for a big graffiti event out there, and it's amazing to see the types of what we call productions that happen. And so, and the different kind of themes. In a few slides, I'll show you an example of that. This one's just a fun, colorful piece. And so, just a different example of kind of styles and letters. And so, it is fun to see, after a while, you kind of recognize different people for their letter structure and their just how their pieces look. And so this one says Fatso, Fatso, and yeah, you can see the fun part is just a lot of times the creativity around connecting letters so that the F goes into the A and the T is connected to the top of the A, and then the S and the O are connected as well. And I wanted to share this picture. This is of an artist named Kane out of Toronto. And the fun part of this is that it's just a letter K. And so it's fun to kind of see how, people are taking letters and just building them out, one piece at a time or step at a time, and really developing elaborate ways to display letters. And that's, essentially what graffiti is about. And not only is it by getting your name up as much as possible, but, certainly in these situations, it's showing your kind of skill level with spray paint to your style of graffiti that you do. So this would be, I guess I would lean to more this kind of New York type of style in terms of very clean lines. Arrows are very popular, and look very cool at the same time. So you'll see off of his K that there's an arrow that points into the letter K. And you'll see at the bottom here, there's another arrow that points into the bottom of the K. And so arrows have just been a fun kind of additional piece that people put in to their letters to build them out and give them a different kind of flair. And so it is fun to kind of see how people can take it, and it's fun to see a piece like this where it's just one letter, and how someone that for him he would have started in the early 90s, and so doing graffiti for 30 years, this would be a relatively newer piece in the last couple of years that he completed. So it's fun to kind of see that development. This is a picture. This is a picture from Los Angeles, and so as you go around the world or around North America, it's interesting to see the different kind of styles of graffiti and different kind of ways that cities are, or what they're known for in terms of graffiti. And so in LA, if you've been, obviously there's lots of billboards, and billboards are very, or LA is known for billboards. And so in the graffiti realm, it's the same thing. It's interesting to see. This is one of the first ones that I've ever caught a picture of where people are climbing billboards in the middle of the night and producing quite elaborate pieces of graffiti on them as well. And so this says Buger, so Buger, and talking to people that do, this type of graffiti, is that oftentimes you'll see that they do it between in the early morning hours. So usually between 2 and 4 a.m. Sometimes you'll see videos of guys ending when the sun's coming up, because they've been working on it for a period of time. That's one of those hard things to comprehend and understand, knowing how big billboards are, where they're located, and how visible they are. And so it's as you go through different cities to see kind of what they're known for, what stands out for them in terms of graffiti, has always been interesting. And so this is just a kind of fun picture that I wanted to share. And I guess, yeah, so in terms of the billboard aspect, this is a picture from Toronto. And so this is a similar kind of idea, but on the back of a billboard. And so, it's interesting, especially around the concept of billboards, with the idea of commercialization and of selling of things, that, graffiti, you're really kind of selling your name in some ways, and putting it out there like an advertisement. And so it's kind of ironic to see graffiti using those methods to also promote themselves. And so, there's lots of correlation or similarities to some degree around that promotion piece. And especially it's interesting to see with in Los Angeles, around some of the billboards that they do around movies and things like that, how graffiti artists come up with creative ideas to use that space in unique ways to adapt their work into the backdrop that they're working with. This is a picture actually from St. Louis. So the event there was called Paint Louis. And the reason I wanted to share this picture was really around the kind of creativity that graffiti artists or graffiti artists have. And this would be an example of a piece within what we call a production. And so usually a production means that there's multiple artists involved. Sometimes there's a theme connected to it, or there's similarities between the colors that are being used between the writers. And so there's some continuity between what's being created. And this is kind of a fun theme that was developed around the Pirates of the Caribbean. So instead of the pirates, it's the writers of the Caribbean. And so often people are in graffiti writers, and is a term that's often used. And so writers is sometimes the shorter version. And so that's kind of where this concept obviously came from. And so it's fun to see, how they took that idea and probably spent some time coming up with that idea to then develop and put in, pirates and other characters and things like that to make it this kind of uniform and specific production. Then I was going to move on, add in a little bit around freight trains and how how graffiti uses freight trains and how significant that is in the culture as well. Certainly I'm a big fan of taking pictures of graffiti on trains. And it sounds kind of funny saying it that way, but it's been kind of also a longer term thing in terms of people doing what we call monikers on trains. So in the the early 80s and 70s and stuff, some rail workers and people that would hop trains and coming up with their own monikers, which are similar to tags to some degree, but usually would have a character or something kind of visual to go along with it. That was kind of the early stages of, I guess, graffiti on trains, and then how it's developed to you know, as let's say graffiti has expanded, especially across North America, into cities everywhere, that then the idea was like, okay, well, if I'm, you know, if what's a mode of transportation that I can use to promote my brand and my graffiti. And so that has been a huge development. I would say, you know, it didn't really started off probably in the early 90s. People started getting into it. You know, in Canada, it was probably, you know, 94, 95-ish, where it also started, and it started happening in the US probably similar times. And so it's interesting to see now where you often are at a train crossing or something that, you know, it's hard not to see graffiti on a lot of the trains compared to in the past where it was quite random. So the next few slides are just kind of fun pictures I've taken of trains in probably primarily in Calgary, but just examples that you might see. And so, you know, the idea was really how to, you know, share your brand across North America. And so it's been interesting to see the development in terms of the amount of people doing graffiti on trains, and the whole concept of, you know, that it's really a rolling art gallery. That you know, the exciting part is that you don't really have to leave your city to see graffiti from across North America, which is you know, has certainly been exciting for myself. I often relate it to collecting of hockey cards, that I used to love to go buy hockey cards and open up a pack and wonder what I was going to get. And the same sort of thing I find when I go to a train yard and wait to see what I find. And similarly, you know, the different artists, you know, you get excited for the different artists that you see, that you can get pictures of, to just seeing the work go by you. And so it's been interesting to see. And in that the piece around people in a variety of cities then can become more known by painting freight trains. And so you'll see, you know, I know examples of people in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, for example, that, you know, they haven't been to any large cities, but, you know, they're painting freight trains in their small town in Saskatchewan, and those trains then go across North America. And that, you know, over time, if you're with so many freight trains out there, if you're doing a certain amount of numbers, then there's a chance that people will see it and, you know, start to recognize your work, and you build your fame from there. And so that continues to be the case. And so it's interesting to see how, yeah, people in a variety of places across North America are getting known, even if they aren't going to big cities or traveling anywhere. This is an example of a older rail car that the piece on this one says corpse, so CORPSE. And so, you know, he's from the US, not too sure exactly where, but so then, you know, obviously he painted this at a certain time, and now it's traveled up to Calgary where I took the picture. And so that kind of traveling piece and social media has also kind of reduced the gap in terms of connections, that, you know, you can catch a picture of a train like this. You could possibly go online and find the individual maybe connected to it or share it online. And oftentimes, you know, the artists, you know, it's easier to connect with the artists these days, and share kind of images of their train as it travels around North America, which is always fun to see kind of the development of pieces over time, you know, whether the colors on this piece look exactly like they were painted the day of, or have changed over time because of sun, the wearing of the boxcar, the rusting of the metal. It certainly gives it a different feeling than painting a wall, or you know, something that is kind of living and moving and changing constantly. This is a, I just add this in because I thought the SpongeBob SquarePants was kind of funny. But yeah, characters obviously are a fun piece, a fun part of any kind of graffiti piece, and certainly a fun addition. Um, this is a train that carries cars and vehicles in it, and so we call these auto racks, or sometimes they're called holy rollers because they have lots and lots of little holes in them. And it used to be a popular thing to see trains with area codes on them, and so area codes would be used to kind of communicate where that individual was from. That's not as popular these days. This is another train that I just want to share just because it's really the three-dimensional piece of where it's kind of popping off of the train, and the unique design of the character is fun to kind of see how that works. An interesting story that I have around trains and graffiti is really the idea, or at one point I had met an individual that lived in New Jersey, and we met in Montreal at a graffiti event. He went home, and through our conversations, he knew that I lived in Calgary, where we were known for CP Rail. So one time he ended up painting a train. And so one day someone called me and said, "Hey, there's a train downtown that has your name on it, but I don't think you did or anything." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird." And so went downtown and noticed this train, and it was this gentleman from New Jersey. And so it was amazing to see that he had planned, how unique it was that he came across a CP rail train, painted it, said, mentioned me on it, and miraculously it showed up in my city where I could see it, get a picture of it, and so it's essentially like sending out a postcard or a bottle into the ocean to some degree, and that's kind of the fun part about freight trains that people certainly are attracted to. Yeah, this is just another one that kind of another piece with arrows in it that says Ulcer, and just the different colors of boxcars, the different colors of pieces, kind of create a different look for each piece that you'd see on a train. Yeah, and this is another one as well. That's kind of another unique style, and same sort of thing, a different color boxcar, but the same sort of thing. You kind of see the wear and how over time the look of the piece most likely changes. I want to get in, since we're running a little bit of time for questions, but this is obviously I want to talk around street art and the development of street art. And so this was an elaborate piece that was done with all spray paint in St. Louis. And so it was amazing to see it kind of come together with over multiple days, and to see how detailed and realistic it looks like, when with just using spray paint. So, the shading of the tattoos, can't really see the kind of piece that goes over the woman's hair, but the details of the little I would call it doily stuff, but that's not right. But just the details on this piece and the shading of it with spray paint is amazing to see. But certainly this would fall into more of that kind of street art realm. And so the thing about street art and graffiti is really where people kind of develop their skills and where they kind of came from. So a lot of people are into art, varieties of art, and they learn to get interested in doing larger scale murals, whether they do brushwork or roller work or something different. And then sometimes they start to dabble in spray paint and try that as well. And some people get really accustomed to it, since it's quite adaptable to it, can cover a lot of areas. And so that's kind of, I would say, where street art has certainly grown quite a bit. And so There's certainly lots of feelings around, it's not graffiti, and that it doesn't get the respect um, because of not having that kind of historical piece or that involvement in doing a legal activity and putting in work. And so, it's not surprising there's feelings there about it. Um, you know, it's it will continue to grow. It's certainly amazing to see the mural festivals that are growing, not only in Canada but throughout the world, that are happening. It's nice to see art being created more and more in cities, and just creating more pieces that provide some a different outlook in terms of your experience of the urban setting, which is nice. And so, graffiti will certainly always, the challenge is obviously the relationship between graffiti. And so, how, people are certainly often take it personally when, a wall has graffiti on it, and then all of a sudden there's a street art mural or something like that. And then, that then sometimes there can be conflict, or graffiti goes over a mural and things like that. And so that's certainly something that is a lot more common these days than it was a few years ago. But I want to share an example. Let's see this forward. But so this would be an example, funny, out of all the slides I put his name up. But so on the right, or this is the artist known as Quest. These letters here are related to graffiti crews that he's a part of. So these would be artists that have come together under an acronym that they kind of associate with and promote as well as their own name. So on the right is a large scale mural that he did with primarily spray paint and spray gun. And so, so it says Quest. That's not a picture of his finished work on that day, but then, the same week he did this graffiti piece on the left in Calgary as well. And so, for someone like that, there's lots of individuals that kind of play in both realms. So they're known obviously from most likely in the graffiti realm, but then to make a living and to kind of live off of their art, then doing larger scale murals, visiting some of these festivals and things like that is more likely a way to make a living than necessarily off of just graffiti. And so there are a lot of artists that kind of play both areas. And so those individuals probably get more, or there's less feelings towards them because of the work that they either continue to put in or have put in the past in the realm of graffiti. And I think this is one of the last pictures I have, but I thought this was an interesting juxtaposition in terms of Toronto. And so on the left, on the large wall, is a Jarvis mural. And so he often uses mainly large brushes and kind of roller paint to paint his kind of realistic imagery of individuals. And then, obviously over the Sam's food store sign is kind of the graffiti, where, the oryx, we call that a roller. So he would have used a roller and roller paint to create those block letters, and then the black kind of fill-ins or throw-ups are other writers. And so, it's interesting to see in a picture like this, both kind of in the same area, which is, will always be the case, but it's just interesting. So show it in this light of what it looks like in a city of Toronto, and that, over time, yes, could murals change because of involvement with graffiti to, as, murals maybe increase or street art increases, how will that impact graffiti? And the challenge obviously is that, and that people like about it, is that there's no set rules, right? That there's certainly some underlying understandings, but especially in this day and age, a lot of those get thrown out of the window. And so, to have these two side by side, only time will tell how things develop, but certainly both are here to stay. Yeah, so those are all the pictures I put together, which kind of puts us right on timeline. That's my Instagram account for graffiti and the website, and that's my email if you have any questions.
Wow, thank you, Adam. That was amazing. It's so funny too, because I'm from Calgary, and it's really interesting to see some of those images, and I was like, yeah, that's right, that's a railway right behind the Esker and like Inglewood, and it like really took me back and really think about like what was like the first graffiti piece that I saw that like stuck with me. And I don't know if you noticed them, but it's like the little vendor heads around Calgary. I don't know if you've noticed them, but those ones just really touched my soul. But like it just really brings up to what you were talking about, and I guess also now is like the Q&A. So feel free to send that in through the chat, and I do have a few questions for you, Adam. So I'm just going to selfishly ask my questions first. But I really loved how you talked about how like identity, and also like how graffiti identity and self-presence really finds a way to like uplift the artists, and it's like a huge staple, and to be seen and to be heard but still have that anon sort of presence to it, and which makes like graffiti so interesting, I think. And it's like that precarity, the in-betweenness. And so my question, I have two, but I guess one of the questions I was thinking of was that you like went from graffiti to like street art and then kind of ended on mural. And we're in Kelowna right now, like muralists are huge at the moment. And back in 2020, I was working with Afros in the City and Pink Flamingo for a potential mural for Black Lives Matter. And it just kind of got shut down. And because of, there's this debate of like, graffiti, like, is it ephemeral? Like people can take over it, but can a mural be taken down? Are they meant to be like removed, or like are murals or graffiti supposed to be there forever? So it's kind of a question, maybe like a conversational question, but do you have any thoughts about like the ephemeral aspects of graffiti or mural making?
Yeah, well, yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see of where the mural stuff ends up, I guess, because, I get like, if someone was asked me now, I would assume that most murals will stay, the way they are for a long period of time. But, whereas graffiti, some stuff lasts, but the idea that it will disappear at some time is a reality, right? And so that's the part about really documenting and capturing the variety of graffiti that happens is important. I think there's certainly graffiti, what I've seen is impacts the longevity of some of these murals for sure. And so I think maybe that it's I would say it's not the most positive aspect in terms of trying to just create, as I said, a more robust urban atmosphere through art in general, but that graffiti will always play a role in impacting the urban landscape no matter what. And so you'll see in probably other cities as well that people do a mural, it's up for a little while, then some people decide to do graffiti on it, and then the mural changes, right? And maybe that's something that will impact the longevity of murals in the future in terms of like, hey, this this can be something that can change over time and doesn't have to be a long-standing art piece that, maybe we're used to.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting. So in Calgary, there's this, it's called Bump. They're a muralist group. And I think from like 2020 to now, they're just really super, you see Bump murals everywhere now in downtown Calgary. But, there's like this sort of like refinedness that comes with mural making. And there's also like the exchange of money, whereas like graffiti is just so like subversive in a way. It almost like gives like underrepresented voice, like people voices in a way, like even simple tagging, like someone tagging, that S, that old 90s S, the 3 lines, like small ways like that. It's really interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, like graffiti is certainly the way of, turning up your nose at regular society, right? And so, that will always be the case. Like, as they talk about the war on graffiti, war on drugs, and all that stuff, the wars never fix anything, right? And so, that's the same for graffiti. It will always be here. It will always be around. It will certainly develop, and it has developed. It will continue to develop in different ways, and the creativity will continue to happen on how to get your name out there, right? Like, and you see that happening constantly, and that's, to me, that's fun to see the progression in terms of any culture of where it kind of grows to and grows from.
Yeah, totally. And it's, yeah, in any culture too, because it shifts. I thought it was really funny that you brought up how your friend like tagged your name and it like just traveled. And it like reactivates spaces too. It kind of reminded me when you mentioned that there was like, I'm not too sure if you remember, but in 2015, there was the, I think it's like, Unceded Voices. It was a bunch of like Indigenous graffiti artists, and they mainly use like street art or like stencils to create work. But this one piece was I think they stenciled like a piece of land, like a rock, like a rock facing land, and it had like the emblem. I think it was like the Saskatchewan emblem. This is just from the top of my head. But it was just like so strange because I saw it and I was just like, is this defacement or is it a petroglyph, And it's just so strange. And I don't know, there's so many ways where graffiti isn't graffiti anymore, or like it's more than that. Anyway, thank you. I really appreciate that. Your comments.
Well, yeah, like certainly that, like, yeah, it's really in the eye of the beholder of what people
Oh
think of it,
yeah,
right? Like, is it vandalism or not? Is always the debate, and there'll always be opinions to both sides of it. That's for sure.
totally. Thank you. I'm just gonna invite anyone in the chat and the participants if you want to submit a little question. I know I kind of started it pretty heavy. I'm just super into this topic. But be welcome.
Nope. Nobody has any questions?
Don't be shy.
Not that I have the answers to anything.
Yeah, right. But it's like in itself too, I was thinking about when you mentioned, you're like, can this be conversational? And that's almost like witnessing graffiti too, right? So when you encounter it with a friend or something, you like converse about it. It's not like this, like what Zoom does, this like barrier, or like being a presenter. It's much more like raw and organic. But yeah. Anyone? I'll give it a few more seconds. I'm just gonna write down, like, I want to share my notes about your presentation that I really loved. Yeah, the rush of adrenaline, the dedication. I don't think a lot of people realize how much work. I'm not too sure if you know Stefan from Knotted Roots or Shaolin Sundays at CGSW. I have to introduce you to him. He's a really cool guy, and he does a lot of paintings, and he was super into graffiti style art, but just like talking about the amount of skill and, oh, we got a question, and dedication towards it. Thank you, Kelly. So it says, hi, I'm also from Calgary. The idea of stencils is interesting to me, usually more political and closer to graphic design. Oh, that's a good comment. Have you ever seen like stencil work that wasn't like politically driven at all, or?
Oh yeah, there's certainly stencil work that isn't politically driven. It's interesting to see. Like I'm not super familiar with the development of stencil work, but it's amazing to see, some of that, the growth to how elaborate it could be, right? And so, it's yeah, from the Banksy examples, yes, certainly there's more of the political side of things, and thinking about some of the more well-known ones in the US and Canada, there's often a message which, is great. Like it's nice to have ways to kind of provoke those conversations and things like that. In the graffiti realm, stencils are kind of frowned upon to some ways because, the idea of being able to really do it kind of, not hands freehand, I guess is the proper term, right? That you have that ability to create things on your own. So, it's interesting, the idea of stencils, is certainly some people use them in terms of their creations, but, they certainly play a role in the whole idea of street art. And, it's interesting to see other ones like Space Invader, who does more like ceramic art with tiles and things like that. That there's so many ways to create an identity, or create a name for yourself around that idea of anonymity around your art.
Thank you. Do you feel like writing a book about this sort of work kind of brings out like a broader audience to graffiti, that is helping the artists, the graffiti artists, like endorse themselves in a way?
Uh, I haven't really thought about it that way. Like to me, it was always what I found interesting was to show, the variety of people that get into graffiti, and that it's not just, let's say, troubled youth and bad kids and whatever, right? That, it's funny going to graffiti events these days, and you always know the guys or gals with kids, they're the ones there at 8 or 9 in the morning because they need to be done by 4 or 5 to be home. Um, so it's, even in the book, there's, individuals that are now, working, with youth around hip hop, to, a lot get into design work, whether it's on the technology side, to tattoo work, to, people that get into are lawyers, to architects and doctors. So, just because you do graffiti doesn't mean you're going to end up in a bad place, right? And so, it certainly is a way for people to, I guess, express themselves, but also hopefully, put them on a path, whether it's good or bad. It all depends, but it's certainly an outlet.
Totally. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about freights and trains, like, because I think it's like very old, archaic knowledge of like thinking that like homeless folks live around trains and freights, and like, are they the ones taking? And it's like, no, the reality is, yeah, train art's my favorite too, Kelly. It's, yeah, and some of those were, yeah, which one was there was like a couple of the freights that you showed that I was just like, wow. I'm like, I can't even comprehend where to start. Like, even when you were reading them, I was just like, where do you see the K? Like, I saw corpse on that one, but like, even then, that's like staying with the community. Anyway, I kind of went on a ramble there. But yeah, it like makes you to reassess the space that you're in. And I think you mentioned it too in the beginning about like the 9 to 5er, like that 9 to 5er is like probably like has that Sharpie in his pocket on the C train, takes up a seat a lot.
For sure.
Yeah, right on. Oh, we're at 7 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. I guess I'll probably thank everyone for coming here. And you're welcome to leave. We'll have this we'll have this recorded up on our site, and welcome you all to rewatch. And just very much a big thank you to Adam for being here and sharing your knowledge and your expertise and like some of the little snippets of your book. And yeah, definitely Sophia mentioned like she's like, I'm getting your book now. I'm like, me too, girl, me too. So
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you for having me, and thanks for those who took their time out this evening to join us. Appreciate it.